Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. My name is Peter Grohman. I'm the resident coordinator and UNDP resident representative in Bahrain, and I'm very happy to chair this first session, now getting into the thematic itself. I would just like to start and remind everybody that about a year ago, UNDP did a first big forum about democratic transitions, pathways to democratic transitions, where we invited, as UNDP, we invited many experiences from other parts of the world to present their ways on how they did their democratic transformations. This year, I think we focus on where we are 1 year after the Arab Spring, 1 year after the beginning of different transitions in the region, to see where we stand. And I'm very happy to have here today with me two colleagues and I would say one practitioner of transition. So first, I would like to introduce Geoffrey Prewitt, who's going to talk first, here on my right. He is the deputy head of the UNDP center in Cairo, regional center in Cairo. We also will have Jeff Twinder, who is the manager of the social accountability practice of the World Bank Institute. And then I'm especially happy to have here as well Khalid Ali, who actually participated as presidential candidate in the election here in Egypt, and he's now the head of the Egyptian Center for Social and Economic Rights. Without further delay, I would like to give the word to Jeff. We have 1 hour for this session, and as just has been announced, there will be no questions after the different presentations, but I would like you to please write down anything you would like to ask afterwards, either the speakers or things you would like to discuss for the afternoon session. Thank you. Jeff.
Sabah al-Khair, distinguished participants and friends.
Good morning. صباح الخير السيدات والسادة.
Actually, I was not to speak at any great length during this session, but due to a regrettable scheduling conflict, our colleague Ms. Heba El-Kholi will be joining us tomorrow, so I will act in her stead. But I will not be using her talking points. So the issues that I raise and the content is for my attribution, for better or for worse. So please bear with me. As noted earlier, there are current events taking place in Cairo, and we understand, particularly for our Egyptian colleagues, this is a matter of grave concern. We simply hope that there is no more injury to person or place, and that all parties seek to address matters peacefully. I think it was necessary for me to say that at the outset because it is a preoccupation on many of our minds. As reflected in the agenda, the aim of the first session is, and I quote, understanding accountability in the context of transition. In spite of serving as one of the organizers, I now see the misnomer within this title. Therefore, I regret that I will commence with a disclaimer. How can one expect to unpackage, to understand, to analyze the complexity of such processes and interactions in an evolving and fluid context, and as Peter reminded me, in no more than 15 minutes? The matter is countless, subject to number of treatises, some of which I'll deploy in my paper, and I've referenced them here for your further use. Moreover, it is not my role to lecture on such subjects, but rather it is the purpose of this event. And you will hear from much wiser people than myself on this issue throughout the duration of the conference. As stated well by the Halling Center, the search for models is at best elusive, at worst distracting. But still, we have to ask the right questions and challenge ourselves. That is our responsibility. And in asking these questions, it is incumbent that the response emanates from Cairo and Tripoli and Amman and Rabat and Tunis and other areas of the region. The answers remain there. Therefore, I will use my brief time by asking 5 interconnected questions about the larger governance framework to help establish the foundation for the next 4 days. I will also provide some limited reflections to guide responses. So the first question that I would like to pose: what do we define as governance in the Arab region? What are the key elements and what are the key actors? Clearly, the traditional concord in much of the region has unraveled and in some countries continues to do so. Still, it is my belief that a well-defined socioeconomic and political vision for the region has yet to fully emerge. History has shown us that transitions are not bound to follow a linear path. Transitions can travel through periods of uncertainty and, very unfortunately, also violence. This is not immune to this region, but global. We seem to accept the components of the governance equation for which I've listed up on the slide. For example, in the case of UNDP, this is premised on normative notions of inclusive politics, responsive institutions, and resilient societies. So yes, we can provide a textbook response and definition. Yet the events and the positions that unfolded after late 2010, early 2011, clearly have not settled, and doubt that we can easily say that governance will resemble the traditional orthodoxy of attributes. It proves vital to balance and nurture the evolution of indigenous governance structures, including a reemergence of political Islam. Some have invoked an analytical characterization of the Arab events as taking on the form of deferred post-colonial defiance. Whereas I disagree, it does beg the question of, will countries emerging from transformative changes take globalized norms of constitutionalism, good governance, and human rights and adapt them to local socio-cultural context? Or will they attempt a full reinvention of a developmental state and their social compact paradigms? Introducing democracy does not necessarily mean a westernization of society. Is it actually necessary to define outcomes or push practices before they commence? Our litmus test, and here I refer to the signatures of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is to uphold values and principles enshrined in our global convents without being confrontational or challenging national sovereignty. But it is clear in the current transition there is an increasing debate, one worth having, between secular and religious worldviews espoused by different sectors of society, which are being played out in the process, for example, of rewriting society's values into constitutions. These new constitutions will then set the legal framework that will be the reference of upward accountability. Thus, it will be important to carefully follow these drafting processes to ensure that the diversity of all voices are maintained and protected. My second question is the following: how to overcome notions of state centrism in the social contract? Following on the same thread as above, I wish to reference UNDP's Arab Development Challenges report, and I would encourage everyone to receive a copy at the back of the room during the break. The history of the region has been centered on the role of the state and the capture of the polity and economy. The report's main message encompasses much of what we will discuss today. That is, the modest development outcomes in the region And here I speak of a litany of issues, from youth unemployment to gender inequality to continued civil and sectarian violence to environmental degradation, are largely due to the past corrupting influence of rents and politics of patronage that have weakened the mutual accountability between states and citizens. In an ideal world, which perhaps doesn't exist, we have a balance of the various constituents within a society. Unfortunately, in much of the world, we still have an overwhelming predominance of governance factors. So as a result of poor governance mechanisms, for example, private sector investment has been skewed towards speculative activities, RE such as luxury real estate, and extraction of natural resources that have favored consumption patterns of the rich, and public investments have had limited effectiveness. In short, the prevailing form of the social contract in the past, and in some cases continuing, was essentially one where the population exchanged, or rather was asked to sacrifice, political freedom in return for the provision of uneven social services and subsidies, and often those that benefited a select few or a specific income bracket. And as the slide represents, economic growth does not always equate with well-being. You see a representation here of Egypt and Tunisia, which experienced significant economic growth per capita over the course of the last, I think it's 5 years, but that was not illustrated in the well-being of people surveyed based on their perceptions. Therefore, for the past 4 decades in the region, and I think we would agree, there was a sense of benign or even extroverted paternalism towards citizens from their leaders and the private sector, often in collusion with foreign actors. From our global experience, what is clear, any transition is about reshaping the engagement between the people and the state, and this is happening daily in the region. In essence, it's about forging a new legitimacy for the state that relies on the confidence and political and economic inclusion of all sectors of society. Only this will lead to improved well-being. And by all sectors, I want to stress the importance of women and youth. For example, if basic rights for women are repressed, which they are, as noted in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, where regrettably the Arab region fares poorly, how can gains in other areas, such as access to information, be valued? If only men are producing and controlling this information, and in some countries in the region, where over 50% of the women are illiterate, transparency of information remains rhetorical. The tough development choices desirable in the Arab region can only be made by a responsive and accountable governance structure that represents the needs of the many, not the few. My third question is the following: how to balance stability with freedom of expression and the very high expectations of transition. Under this question, 3 points are worth mentioning. First, it will require very courageous and candid leadership to maintain the equilibrium of people's anticipation for results and the difficult economic and political reforms that will be required in the next decades. The World Bank has estimated that it takes an average of 41 years for countries to successfully establish the rule of law. 41 years, which is necessary for a functioning democracy to take hold. Even relatively successful transitions, such as Indonesia, took 10 years. There is a gap between desirability and feasibility, but in part, governance is all about the administration of expectations. Second, due to many years of autocratic regimes, a free civil society and the media are still nascent. Frustrations are understandable. However, freedom of expression does not equate with shouting fire in a crowded movie theater. starting unmitigated rumors in the press, or destroying public and private property. Civil society and the media must be harnessed to serve as peaceful countervailing forces against repressive tactics, or in other words, keeping the transition honest and moving forward progressively. As with the solid rule of law, this type of organization will take time. Most CSOs are law-abiding, transparent, and work to promote mutual and public benefit. Third, and related to the above, what is revitalizing the CSO and media sectors during the transition is the interplay of old, traditional, heavily regulated and controlled wings and new, or less regulated and sometimes out-of-control wings. In the CSO sector, it is the tension between established and regulated formal NGOs and new social movements comprised of youth and revolutionary groups. And in the media, it is the relationship of traditional, regulated, and controlled, normally state or privately owned mass media, and new, much less regulated forms of social media, such as Twitter. Accountability in both wings may have different meanings and may require different approaches to address. The important point that I would like to make here is that no sector, private, public, or voluntary, is beyond reproach. In doing so, civil society must be accountable along three different axes. It must be accountable upwards to the legal frameworks that govern the country. It must be accountable downwards to the constituents it serves. And it must be, of course, accountable inwards to its own governance and organizational structures. My fourth question, how to weigh the need to consolidate governance gains whilst not neglecting other important areas of need? And I think this is a particularly tricky question. As mentioned earlier, the economy, the environment, gender, and youth are also important aspects of the larger governance concerns. For example, FDI in the region has declined from USD $63 billion in 2010 to only $29 billion in 2011. This is obviously causing enormous financial constraints. Additionally, although unemployment rates vary from one country to another, the average rate among youth in the region is estimated at nearly a quarter of the population. And Arab women in particular bear the brunt of unemployment and of vulnerable employment. Turning to environment, the last Arab Human Development Report, 2009, indicated that Arab countries have not shown a level of environmental stewardship that is consistent with protecting natural resources of the region. Short-term profits trump long-term conservation efforts. This was further confirmed by UNDP's Arab Development Challenges Report. We are facing several serious threats to the welfare of people's livelihoods, from issues of water scarcity to land degradation to demographic trends to high fossil fuel intensity to climate change, etc., etc. In addition to the problem of depletion in natural resources that serve as the income base for many of the Arab states, such as oil and gas, wasteful consumption practices, in combination with potentially increasing episodes of drought due to the climate change, pose a major water deficiency. In all countries, with the exception of Iraq, Sudan, and Lebanon, their per capita share of renewable water resources falls below the international water poverty line. It is unnecessary, however, to continue with an enumeration of the challenges. My point is different. With attention focused on consolidating the potential political gains emerging from the transformative events of last year, let's not forget the potential revolutionary causes of the future. Lastly, based on all of the above, what is social accountability in a period of transition? Fortunately, my friend, coming to close, Jeff the Window will go into detail in responding to this question, so I will be brief. But in synopsis of my earlier points, I want to stress that social accountability involves the responsibility of all actors in multiple sectors, or as very eloquently stated by my colleague Marwan Abu Samra, it is a co-production, so to speak. Social accountability refers to a form of accountability that emerges through people's actions, aimed at holding the state to account. It can provide an extra set of checks and balances on the state in the public interest, exposing instances of corruption, negligence, and oversight. It must be exercised on a continuous basis, and it must be conducted responsibly. As Nelson Mandela once said, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chain, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedoms of others." In closing, I thank you for your time. I trust my presentation was not too confusing, although slightly, or lengthy. It was not meant to provide definitive recommendations, but rather to stimulate some common points for consideration during the course of the next 4 days. We very much look forward to hearing your input and wish for a very successful and thought-provoking event. Thank you.